Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. Welcome back to my channel, and this time is for the 5512 week 6 lecture notes. Let's begin. The topic is about date market 2, medium to long-term dates. And thanks to Dr. Lai. So in this lecture, we'll cover the following: describe various forms of long-term financing arrangements, distinguish between the different types of lease plan characteristics, so select long-term debt securities, bond term terminology, and relationship affecting evaluation. So, a borrower should consider the following factors: fixed or variable interest rate, terms of finance arrangement, repayment schedule in the long covenant. Sorry for that.
Covenants.
Covenants, security, secured or fixed or floating charge or unsecured. Now we like to introduce mid to long-term date. Its long-term date is a financial arrangement for a period of more than 1 year with various characteristics to suit borrower's particular needs. And the matching principle is that the long-term assets should be funded with long-term liabilities. On the right hand, we can find that there is non-tradable sources like term loans and fully drawn advance, mortgage, finance, lease, and tradable securities like debentures, unsecured notes, subordinated, subordinated, subordinated dates,
Subordinated.
subordinated dates. So let's talk about long-term finance sources of the non-tradable sources. So first one is term loan and fully drawn advance. Term loan is a loan advance for the specific period, 3 to 15 years, usually for the non-purpose secured for mortgage over assets purchased or other assets of the firm, fixed or floating rate. Fully drawn advance is a term loan where the full amount is provided at the start of the loan. Amount is advanced to the borrower for the specific period. Major provider or term loan are mainly commercial bank and financial companies, but also investment banks, merchant banks, insurance office, and credit unions. Interest rate charged on term loan is based on an indicator like the BBSW or the LIBOR, London Interbank Overnight Rate, or banks or premier lending rates, and it's also informed by credit rates of borrowers' terms of loan. Apart from interest charge, there might also be establishment fee, service fees, commitment fees, line fee. And the loan covenants protects the financial risk exposure of the lender. There are two types. The first one is positive covenant. It requires borrower to take prescribed actions. Negative covenant is restricted actions and financial instruction of borrower. Branch of covenant resulting in default of the loan contracts in telling lender to act. The term loan structure, we can find that there's interest only loans, interest only during term or loan, and the principal repayment on maturity, amortized or credited foncier loan,
Foncier.
loan, periodic loan instrument consisting of interest due and reduction of principal. Deferred repayment loan installment comes after a specific period related to project cash flow, and the date is amortized over the remaining term of loan. Interest may be fixed or variable. The three types. Next one is the mortgage finance. A mortgage is a form of security of the loan where the borrower converts interest in the loan to the lender. If the mortgage defaults on the loan, the mortgage is entitled to foreclose on property. They can take possession of assets and realize any amount earned on the loan. Mortgage finance, mainly used for real home loans and to lease directly commercial to lesser degree commercial property. I don't know what that means. Lesser, because I think it's just word less. What is lesser degree commercial property loans up to 10 years. Another other type is the lease. A lease is a contract where the owner of the assets granted other parties the right to use the asset for the granted period of time in return for periodic rental payments. Leasing is a borrowing of an asset instead of borrowing funds to purchase the assets. Advantage of leasing for lessee over borrow and purchase alternative is that it conserves capital, provide 100% funds.
Conserves.
Lessee matches cash flow lease like to bench any existing long covenants. Rental payments are tax deductible. Advantage of leasing for lessor over a strict loan provided to a lessee. Owner of the assets. Leasing has relatively low level of overall risk as assets can be reprocessed if lessee defaults. Leasing can be administratively cheaper than providing the loan. Leasing is an attractive alternative source of financing to both business and governments. So there are two types. First is operating lease. It's operating lease, a short-term lease. This may lease the asset to successively lessees.
Successive
leases. Lessee can lease assets for a short-term period if a full service lease. The maintenance and insurance of assets is provided by the lessor. Obsolescence risk stay with the lessor.
Obsolescence
risk stays with the lessor. Leasing. Financial leasing is a long-term lease. Lessor finances assets. Lessee contracts to make regular lease rental payments over the life of the lease and a lump sum payments at the end of the lease period. Ownership of the asset passes to lessee on payments of the residual amount is the financial lease. In the next lease, the lessee pays for maintenance and repayments, insurance, taxes, and stamp duties associated with the lease. In the sales and the lease back, the existing assets owned by the original owner are sold to cash. Assets are leased back from the owner. Removes expensive assets from the lessee's balance sheet. The lease payments are financed from income earned from the use of assets, and the cross-border lease is a lessor is one country leases an asset to the lessee in another country. Management of foreign currency risk from cash flow received and payment and payable is critical to success. Leveraged financial lease. Lessor contributes limited equity and borrows the majority of funds required to purchase assets that is to be leased. These management structures are negotiated the lease and mandate. They bring together the lessor, date parties, and lessee. Lessor gains take advantage from the depreciation of equipment and the interest paid to the date parties. The equity lease is similar to the leveraged finance. The finance need to buy assets are provided by the lessor. Therefore, it is usually smaller in size than a leveraged finance lease. It has many characteristics of the leveraged lease, including the formation of the partnership to purchase the asset, but not advantages of average. Long-term debt arrangements, short-term, and Next part we like to discuss the tradable securities. Yes, long-term tradable securities versus bond, debenture, and unsecured notes are issued in the corporate bond market. Debenture secured by either a fixed or floating shadow over issues unpledgeable assets are listed and traded on the stock exchange, have a high claim over the company's assets than unsecured note holder. Unsecured notes bound with no underlying security attached rank lower than all debenture holders. Unsecured notes is a note that without collaterals. And there are three principal issue methods: the public issue, family issue. Public issue is to public at large by prospectus.
Prospectus.
Family issue is issued to existing shareholders and investors by prospectus. Private placement is to institutional investors if an information memo and the subordinated date is held by subordinate against all other creditors but above equity holders. Agreement may specify that the date may not be presented for redemption until after a certain period has expired, like both state and equity. So next part, we need to introduce calculation of the non-term tradable security, because yes, only the tradable one is needed to be calculated, because for the non-tradable we do not need to calculate the amount. Yes, we still need to for the amount in the balance sheet. So we can find the terminologies. Sorry for that. Last night I felt a little bit cold. Maybe I got the flu this time. I don't know. Excuse me. There's many terminologies in the bond. The bond income or asset and income, face value, coupon rate, coupon payment, maturity date, yield to maturity, call provision, and the conversion features. Yes, we can find that. And there is very important called bond rating. Bond rating indicates the default risk of the borrower. So that's the rating from the Standard Poor's and Moody's. So that's the detailed formula of the calculation. The bond value is present value of the bond interest payment and present value of the bond principal amount. And the detailed amount here, we can find that. It looks a little bit weird, but we can find the detailed calculation in the workshops or in the class. Next is the valuing bond. The previous formula is for calculating price of a fixed interest bond, and the coupon rate. The price of bond needs to be adjusted if it is calculated in between two coupon dates. We can find that the value of bond is inversely related to change in the market required year to maturity. We found that if the yield to maturity is lower than the coupon rate, the bond value, the first value will the price will increase. The price will higher than the face value. If the yield to maturity YTM is bigger than the coupon rate, the actual price of the bond will lower than face value. That's because the yield to maturity rate, the yield to maturity is the actual return of what you will get. That's correct. We can see that premium price is higher than face value if the yield to maturity is lower. The issuer will will compensate you with will compensate you with higher price. Sorry for that. You know, the year to maturity rate is the rate that you should get, that you should get, and the coupon rate is the bond rate. If the bond rate is higher than what you should get, you need to compensate the issuer with, which is represented in the higher price. It's called premium. Correct. And the interest rate risk is long-term bond have a greater interest rate than short-term bond. Great. While all bonds are affected by the changing interest rate, the price of longer-term bonds fluctuated more when interest rate changes at once than do the price of short-term bonds. So that's the conclusion that we discussed the long-term funding sources, tradable and non-tradable sources, and least relevant long-term strategy, and the most important one is the calculation and the premium and the discount the bond issuing. So that's all about the lecture notes.